Did you know that August was Wellness Month? I mean, wellness is something we should be taking seriously every day, but it's great to highlight, spotlight how you can get your wellness back on track. But by the title, talking about wellness for yourself, this is more of workplace leadership wellness that I'm diving into. So it's a really important topic, I think, very close to my heart, which is talking about communication gaps. They're everywhere, right? Just like opinions, they're everywhere. But we got to really learn how to navigate this. Yes, in our personal lives, honestly, the past couple of months, I have really come to understand how small nuances and how people communicate can turn into really huge things. And it takes integrity and maturity to overcome that. But of course, the same is true when it comes to the workplace. And I've been on both sides of this equation of the communication gaps. Now, having little misfires is inevitable. We can't necessarily avoid them completely, but we can approach it in a different way so that communication gaps don't cause team catastrophes. Because that's what happens when we don't pay attention to the sleeping giant that's in front of us. We've got to deal with the elephant in the room, but sometimes we are so focused on like the task at hand. Functions are great, functions are important, but your team cannot level up. Your work cannot surpass, you know, status quo if you don't tackle this. A sense of communication between two parties. And there's a lot of things involved in it. And I'm seeing it as so much so as a problem that I am doing a live training. If you follow me on all my socials, I just posted it about a great training that I'm doing on September 20th at NEIU about teaching leaders how to close communication gaps. But briefly, I'll talk about that in a second. I just want to dive into why this is important. I have, worked, right, throughout my career, and there were so many times with little unsaid things, and a lot of these things happened after hiring. There was a gap then in expectations, things that were not communicated to me, or things that managers, leaders, HR people didn't even know mattered. So everybody is operating as two ships passing in the night because we have different expectations that were not communicated on paper, where both people are seeing it and agreeing to it, and then can walk the same walk at that point. And so those small little communicators turn into catastrophes. So the impact of not closing these communication gaps, right? Think about surgery. If you've ever had surgery, I've not had real surgery. I've had my wisdom teeth taken out. And even that I tried to negotiate myself out of because the needles and the cutting thing makes my knees weak. But anyway, if you think about surgery, the surgery is complete. Something had to be fixed in this scenario. They don't just leave this gaping wound open. Think about what a catastrophe that would be if we left surgery patients just walking around here with, blood and bone and muscle tissue all exposed. That would mean that the work, the correction that was done, it meant nothing if you don't close that hole, if you don't close that gap. Think about your city streets, the potholes. Goodness, I know in the city of Chicago, do y'all need help? I mean, I'm not in construction, but if you could teach me really quick how to fill a hole on my street, I could do that, no problem. But when we have gaping potholes that don't get filled, it messes up people's cars, right? You can trip over them. I've tripped over potholes. My ankles roll anyway, but it's never a good thing. So, same thing. We're in a workplace. Communication doesn't always seem like a life or death kind of thing, but we know, and I believe, and I've seen that life and death really is in the power of the tongue. So, as a leader, are you killing your workforce by not addressing these communication gaps? So, some of the impact of having them is that everyone has a different understanding of what's going on. And they're filtering it through their own experience, through their own behaviors, their own personalities, traumas, triggers. That's how they are showing up to work. So your job as a leader is to make sure, how can we bring everyone to the table and appreciate all of the diversity, all of the greatness that people bring, different perspectives, but still walk away with the same sense of understanding. When we all have the same message, we're going toward the same place, then we can not only walk, but we can run. We can be strong in that effort. But when no one hears the same message, you can't really move in the same direction. You stay stuck where you are, and then you wake up and it's review time, and you say, man, why am I, have I not made it here? Why is my, then there's frustration that's built in. But when did you stop to say, do we all understand the same thing? If not, great. Now let's address that. But nobody can really work together and run together when everybody has a different sense of understanding. Let's take the body as an example, right? My mind has to determine I'm going to get up and walk this way, right? And then my feet follow. My mind and my feet cannot be going in opposite directions. My mind can't have one understanding and my feet have another understanding. I would never get anywhere. How would you even get out of bed if the body, which essentially I'm talking about is the team, cannot get on one accord? Another impact of having unfilled communication gaps is that I just read a recent study that the average worker spends 30% of their time sending emails. We know all kinds of interpretations can come from an email. Raise your hand if you received an email from someone and you're like, what? I probably need to take a beat before I respond to this. It's all in communication style and interpretation. Even with email, people's behavioral patterns show up in that, and they might show up as offensive to other people. There have been times where I have like drafted an email, like, let me get this person together really quick. But I was so happy I didn't send it because my emotional intelligence said, let me go ahead and regulate myself before I respond. And in some cases, before I responded, I ended up talking to the person on something else. And I was so thankful I didn't send that email because that's not even what they meant. So, especially if you have a hybrid workforce or a remote workforce, even communicating via email can send people off. I've had venting sessions with clients and with friends based off of an email and how things were communicated. This is why we've got to bring all the minds on the table to the table, make sure we speak in the same language. I'll get into that more in a second. And then, of course, when there's gaps in communication, people who maybe have the same problem or have the same value system or same grievance, we've just formed pockets. Hello, here are your silos. We have just formed them, and this is what's happening. And as those form, we're squeezing somebody out. And in most cases, it's you, the leader, the manager, the director. You don't really know what's going on because nothing's on fire. So things are operating in the norm, but there's fire brewing that you can't see that might show up in a surprise quitting, or might show up in a strike, or might show up in someone who just says, you know what, I'm just gonna buck against everything you say. These are some really quick, there's lots more, but these are high level impacts of what happens when you have very large gaps in your communication. So why do they occur? They don't just happen in a vacuum. It's not because, I'm a good person, you're a bad person. That's not how communication gaps occur. They happen when we can be so singularly focused. And with the nature of work, man, the amount of our tasks have just exponentially doubled and tripled from what they were 2 weeks ago. So we got a lot to do. We have a lot to get done. Totally understand that. But if there is no mechanism, no milestone to help your people and yourself to look up for a minute and see what's happening from an aerial view of the whole team, we'll just keep focusing on myself, on my task, because it's my review, it's my raise, my promotion, my whatever that's on the line. And so focusing on our ego and my silo is going to be a breakaway from the island. It also occurs from physical barriers. So, as I've just mentioned, remote work, right? So, in us coming out of COVID, everybody was at home. So, we were all in our own environments. We had our own setup. We weren't attached to something collective and how we physically moved about our workplace. But now that we're out of that, and even with remote work, we have to find a way to not let our physical barriers spill over into other barriers, and also not to let them be an excuse. But even when I was in the office, I remember working places and the team was like over here, and then the manager was like way at the end of the hall, and they're big, you know, C-suite desks. And unless there was no reason for anybody to go over there. So with that kind of physical barrier, it was very clear it's us and them. So even how your workplace is set up can create these barriers that will brew communication gaps. Your environment, if you go into certain co-working spaces, they're designed for people to collaborate. There is a sense of openness. In some cases, being too open, people feel like, oh gosh, like everybody's looking at me. We can, find ways to address that. But even your physical environment, you need to be mindful and intentional to spark collaboration. And then, of course, the hierarchy itself will create communication gaps. But I went to an excellent networking event on Thursday. So, what, 5 days ago? And we had a conversation about a leader being humble enough to say, let me shadow you for a day so I can have a sense of understanding what you do. And that leader walked away with, oh man, I'm just shooting this person tasks. And the one task can take all day. And I just sent them 14. But in our natural sense of hierarchies, as we move up the ladder, we think, okay, great, I can leave that old work behind. I've paid my dues, I've been there, done that. Now I can focus on this. The hierarchies all create walls. Now I'm quoting the Boundaries book by Dr. Henry Cloud and Dr. Townsend. I forget his name, but they describe boundaries as proper boundaries should be gates and not walls. But what I see in corporate environments is that each level has a wall. And unless you are invited to come through the door, then it shuts. We come together quarterly at a big meeting, and even then, it's not encouraging conversation and collaboration. Or we have a big Christmas party, and the same people that you eat with and hang out with or talk to in your normal workday are the same people you are hanging out with in these kind of social events. So the hierarchy itself will create communication barriers. What we need to understand is that communication is a language, and this is not necessarily a language we're born with or that our educational institutions have taught us. This is a skill. And as a leader, it is your responsibility to make sure that the communication is a well oiled machine at each part of your process for each person or each subgroup within your team so that you have one culture ultimately and not five subcultures. But it takes intentionality, it takes skill, it takes integrity, and it takes maturity. So that's why I am doing this session September 20th. It's a morning, almost a half day session from 9 to 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, where we will walk through this, where we will walk through the skill of building a language to close these communication gaps, which ultimately will boost productivity for you and everyone else. It gives everybody buy in, a sense of loyalty and belonging, and to have consistency, to reduce turnover. There's no reason or no way that you as a leader should be showing up to work within your team and you have no idea what's going on with each person. You have kind of an idea of like where they are on their projects. That is the lowest level of communication. We need to bump that up. We need to get you to a better place, right? Ultimately. And I have some tools, a report, a very in-depth report that you will receive as part of registering for this. But we'll talk about your work style. You are going to get some ahas. That's going to change the way you naturally move so that you can be a steward of this information to your team and sharpen your leadership skills. But some ideas for practical application, how to be a leader of influence and not a leader of just delegating tasks. Or even if you are more of a hands-off leader, even still, you can have impact and influence just by how you walk in the room and just how you structure the team. So that's all I got. I don't see any questions in the chat, but if you have any, of course, feel free to respond and I will get back with you on that. But the link is in the description. So I encourage you to sign up. Let's go through this together. Let's make sure by the end of the year, we've gotten everybody to a good place. We've made your team strong. And no, we can't just blame it on, I hired the wrong person. That's a whole nother video. But if they are here now and if they are showing up and doing the work, it's your responsibility then to unlock these communication barriers, to understand their work style. And a bad hire can actually turn out to be a good one or a really great team player or employee, but there's a finesse and there's a strategy that goes along with it. All right. Well, this was good. Thank you for allowing me on my soapbox to share my passion about closing communication gaps. And if you have any questions about the training I'm doing at NEIU in Chicago, let me know. But this is just really a small sliver of what we're going to be doing that's going to unlock some things in your subconscious, things you didn't even know you were doing or not doing that you need to be doing, applying and implementing right now to change the whole tide of your team and your company, which will affect the trajectory, impact, and influence of your career. All right. Thanks for joining me. And